Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking into habits,
Okay.
specifically the ideas in James Clear's book, Atomic Habits,
Right.
and how even tiny changes, when you apply them consistently,
Right.
can lead to pretty big results.
Yeah, it's amazing the power of those small, seemingly insignificant actions and how they can compound over time.
Like there was this British study, I don't know if you've heard of it,
I think I have.
but the people that made a very specific plan, like when and where they would exercise,
Uh-huh.
were more than twice as likely to
Wow.
actually follow through.
That's incredible. It makes you wonder, what other habits could we be nailing if we just had that kind of clarity and planning in place?
Yeah. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some strategies. But
Right.
it's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like, just making a plan makes that much of a difference.
It really highlights the power of intentionality, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like when you set a clear goal and outline those specific steps, you're priming your brain for action.
And another thing that Clear talks about is the relationship between dopamine and habit formation,
Right.
which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's like our brains are wired to seek out those rewards and those feel-good chemicals.
Yeah.
And by understanding how dopamine plays into the habit loop, we can actually hack our own brains to make those good habits more appealing.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some strategies. Claire calls them temptation bundling and habit stacking.
Oh yeah, those are game changers. Like
Yeah.
pairing something you need to do with something you actually want to do, or piggybacking a new habit onto an existing one. It's brilliant.
So we've got a lot to cover today, from the science behind how habits form to practical strategies for building good ones and breaking bad ones. So I'm really excited to dive into this.
Right.
One of the things that I found really interesting that I wanted to start with
Sure.
is Clear's analogy of the plateau of latent potential. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I have. It's a really powerful concept.
He compares it to like heating an ice cube. So you're putting in the effort, you're like, turning up the heat,
Mm-hmm.
you're doing the work, but for a while, nothing seems to be changing.
Right.
And then boom, all of a sudden, the ice starts to melt and you see this dramatic shift.
It's a great analogy for how habits work because it highlights the importance of consistency and patience. We often get discouraged when we don't see immediate results, but those small, consistent efforts are actually laying the groundwork for those breakthrough moments.
Yeah.
It's like building a foundation. You might not see it at first,
Right.
but it's essential for the structure's stability.
It can feel really relatable, right?
Yeah.
Like I know, at least for me, I get discouraged when I'm not seeing those results right away.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is a good analogy to start with because it's like,
It's encouraging.
yeah,
Because it reminds us that even though we might not see those immediate dramatic changes, those small, consistent efforts do matter.
they do.
They're accumulating, behind the scenes.
Yeah. So how can we, I guess, apply this principle to our own lives? So let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, this sounds great, but how do I actually make this work for me?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, I don't know, building a habit of writing every day and you're feeling stuck. What could you do?
One of the things that Clear talks about that I find really helpful is the idea that lasting behavior change actually starts with your identity.
Okay.
So instead of just focusing on the specific habit, like, writing every day,
Mm-hmm.
it's helpful to ask yourself, what kind of person embodies the change I'm seeking?
That's interesting.
So, for example, you might say, I want to be a writer.
Okay.
And then from there, you start building habits that reinforce that identity.
I like that.
Each time you write, you're solidifying that identity. Regardless of the word count, regardless of how many pages you produce,
Right.
it's about taking those small, consistent actions that align with your desired self-image.
So you're embodying the change you want to see.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, so you have that sense of self.
Yeah.
Then where do you go from there? How do you actually start building those habits?
Well, that's where Clear's famous 4 laws of behavior change come in.
okay.
They provide this really practical framework for making good habits easier to adopt and bad habits easier to break.
I like a good framework.
Yeah.
Always helpful.
And the first law is make it obvious.
Okay.
And, remember that British study?
The exercise one.
Yeah, where people who made a specific plan for when and where they'd exercise were more than twice as likely to follow through.
Yeah. They were very specific. They didn't just say, I want to exercise more. It was like, I will exercise for 30 minutes at 7 a.m. in my living room.
Exactly. It's about removing that decision fatigue.
Yeah.
It's already decided.
Yeah.
So think about how you could apply this to your own life. What's a habit you'd like to make more obvious? maybe placing your running shoes by the door, or prepping healthy snacks ahead of time.
Yeah, so they're ready to go when you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those small tweaks to your environment can make a world of
It's
difference.
all about reducing that friction, right?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And Clear actually calls these specific plans implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions.
It's a fancy way of
Mm.
saying you're basically giving yourself a clear trigger for action,
Okay.
like if this, then that.
Okay.
Another great technique is habit stacking, which involves linking a new habit to an existing one.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so after I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 5 minutes.
Okay, so you're attaching that new habit, the meditation,
Hmm?
to an existing habit.
Exactly. It's like you're piggybacking on those existing neural pathways, making it more likely to stick.
So the second law, make it attractive.
Ah, yes. This is where the science of dopamine comes in.
Okay.
Dopamine is that feel-good neurotransmitter
Yeah.
that gets released when we experience pleasure. So the key here is to link your habit to a positive feeling.
Okay.
This might seem tricky if we're talking about, let's say, chores or paying bills. But there are actually clever ways to inject some enjoyment into even those mundane tasks.
Like what could you do?
Oh, this is where temptation bundling really shines.
Okay, so you're pairing something you need to do
Hmm.
with something that you want to do.
Exactly. Like, I often listen to my favorite podcasts while I'm doing housework.
Okay, that's a good one. I do that too.
Yeah, it's a win-win. Or how about watching a guilty pleasure TV show while folding laundry?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
By bundling these activities, you're basically tricking your brain into associating those less than thrilling tasks with something pleasurable.
So we're hacking the reward system.
Exactly. And it actually works.
All right, so that's 2. What's number 3?
Okay, number 3 is make it easy.
I like that one.
Yeah, we all want those good habits to feel effortless, right?
Yeah.
Clear points out that the easier a behavior is to do, the more likely we are to repeat it. So it's all about reducing friction in our environment.
So making the desired action as convenient as possible.
Exactly. Think about those times you skipped a workout
Mm-hmm.
because you couldn't find your sneakers.
Yeah.
Or you decided to order takeout because you didn't have any healthy ingredients on hand.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, those small inconveniences can really derail even the best intentions.
So what can we do about that?
Well, this is where Clear's 2-minute rule comes in.
Okay.
Have you heard of this one?
I have.
Okay, good.
Remind me.
Okay, so the idea is to break down any habit into a tiny, manageable step that takes less than 2 minutes to do.
Okay.
So, for example, if you want to start a meditation practice,
Mm-hmm.
you might begin by just sitting in a comfortable position and closing your eyes for 1 minute.
So you're lowering the barrier to entry.
Exactly. The goal is to just get started. And once you get started, it's much easier to keep going.
Yeah, you're building momentum.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Have you ever used this strategy in your own life?
Yeah, actually I have. I used it to build a writing habit. Instead of overwhelming myself with the thought of writing a whole chapter, I just committed to writing for 5 minutes each day.
That's fantastic.
And you know it worked because
No.
those 5 minutes, that was just the spark I needed
Yeah.
to get going. And then once I started, a lot of times I'd end up writing for much longer.
That's the beauty of it. Those small steps can lead to much bigger actions.
Okay, so now let's flip the script. Let's talk about breaking bad habits. We all have those, right? It's like those weeds in the garden that just keep popping up.
It's so true.
Yeah,
And they can feel so stubborn sometimes. It's like they have a life of their own.
exactly. So how do we get rid of them?
Well, Clear assures us that we can actually break those negative patterns by applying the 4 laws in reverse.
Mm.
So the 4th law is make it unsatisfying.
Okay.
And this is all about increasing the friction associated with those bad habits. Remember the story of the invention of the cash register?
I don't think so.
Oh, it's fascinating. It dramatically reduced employee theft, not by changing people's morals, but by changing the environment, by making stealing practically impossible. It simply became less appealing.
Okay.
We can apply this same principle to our own lives.
Okay, so give me an example.
Let's say you want to watch less TV.
Okay, I'll bite. I need to do that.
You could unplug it after each use, or move it to a less convenient location.
Okay.
Or if you're trying to cut back on social media, you could delete the apps for your phone or use a website blocker.
Okay.
Those small tweaks can make a world of difference in disrupting those automatic behaviors.
It's about making those bad habits less convenient
Exactly.
and less appealing.
You got it. Another strategy is to use what Clear calls commitment devices, choices you make in the present to control your future actions,
Okay.
like scheduling a workout class and
Yeah.
paying for it in advance
Okay.
so you're less likely to skip, or asking a friend to change your social media passwords for a week so you can focus on other priorities.
So you're kind of outsmarting your future self.
Exactly. And by being proactive and strategic, we can shift the balance in our favor, make it easier to stick with those healthy habits.
I like that. Okay, so speaking of environment,
Yeah.
this leads us to another fascinating point that Claire makes about context and how our environment actually shapes our behavior.
Right.
And he talks about this incredible example of Vietnam War veterans.
Oh, yes. The study about the heroin use, right? Pretty
Yes.
remarkable.
They found that a lot of soldiers who used heroin in Vietnam didn't relapse when they came home.
Yeah,
It really challenges those traditional beliefs about addiction, doesn't it?
it does. It really highlights the influence of environment on our habits.
It suggests that our habits aren't set in stone, that maybe we can change them.
It definitely opens up the possibility for change. So, think about your own life for a second.
Okay.
How might your surroundings be influencing your habits?
That's a good question. So, for example, if you're trying to build a habit of reading before bed,
Mm-hmm.
maybe creating a cozy reading nook could make a difference.
Absolutely. It's about setting the stage for success.
So now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Personality and genetics.
Okay.
Don't those play a role in our habits too?
Of course. Clear acknowledges the influence of genetics and personality, but he emphasizes that we're not solely determined by our genes. We still have the agency to choose our environment and cultivate habits that align with our desired outcomes.
So it's not about denying our natural inclinations.
Right. It's about understanding them
Okay.
and working with them.
So there's this thing that he talks about called the explore-exploit trade-off.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that, like, early on in life,
Uh,
it's crucial to experiment and explore different possibilities, try new things, see what resonates with you.
right.
And then as you gain experience, you can start to focus on those areas where you have a natural advantage.
It's like playing a game.
Yeah.
You start by exploring the map.
Yeah.
And then once you've got some intel,
Right.
you can focus your efforts on the areas that offer the greatest rewards.
I like that. Okay, so let's talk about another common challenge that people face when they're trying to build new habits. Staying motivated. It's easy to start with this burst of enthusiasm, but how do we keep that going over the long haul?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we'll delve into deeper in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, let me ask you this. Think about a habit you'd like to build or a bad habit you'd like to break. How can you apply one of these 4 laws we've talked about to make that shift easier? Just something to ponder as we move forward.
Yeah, that's a good question to think about. And we'll be back with part 2 soon.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Welcome back to our deep dive into atomic habits. Last time we were talking about some pretty interesting stuff like the plateau of latent potential
Mm-hmm.
and the power of those tiny gains.
Yeah.
It really got me thinking about how much of our behavior is basically on autopilot.
Right. It's like we're just running these pre-programmed routines day after day
Yeah.
without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
Have you ever, caught yourself reaching for your phone first thing in the morning
Oh, yeah.
without even, consciously deciding to, or mindlessly scrolling through social media?
All the time.
It's like those habits just have this magnetic pull on us, even when we know they're not really serving us.
Yeah, it's true. It's like we're almost powerless to resist.
Yeah, it's like that double-edged sword of habits. They can be super efficient,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They free up our mental energy for other stuff.
Right.
But they can also lead us down paths we wouldn't choose if we were actually paying attention.
That's a good point.
So awareness, I think, is that first step in changing any habit.
Yeah.
We need to actually shine a light on those automatic behaviors
Yeah.
and understand how they're actually impacting our lives.
So how do we do that?
Well, Clear talks about this exercise called the habit scorecard. Have you ever tried this?
I have.
Okay, so you basically write down all your daily habits, both good and bad.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly, just to see it all there in front of you.
And it's kind of scary, but it's helpful.
It can be eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's like taking inventory of your day. You start to see
Yeah.
those patterns. Like, wow, I spend way too much time doing this.
Right.
Or I wish I did more of that.
It's like holding up a mirror to your life.
Exactly.
They're forced to really look at those habits
Yeah.
that are shaping your day-to-day experience.
And once you have that awareness,
Mm-hmm.
then you can start making more conscious choices
Yeah.
about the habits you actually want to cultivate.
Okay, that makes sense. So then how do we actually start building those new habits?
Well, remember the 4 laws of behavior change.
Yeah.
We talked about the first law, make it obvious, last time.
Mm-hmm.
But let's take it a step further
Okay.
and talk about how we can actually optimize our environment
Okay.
to make those good habits easier to adopt.
So what does that look like? What kind of things can we do?
Well, remember how we were talking about reducing friction?
Yeah.
Priming your environment is kind of like setting yourself up for success in advance.
Okay.
It's like creating this little ecosystem that supports your desired behaviors.
So give me an example of what that would look like.
Okay, so think about laying out your workout clothes the night before,
Mm-hmm.
so there's one less obstacle in the morning,
Okay.
or prepping healthy meals ahead of time,
Right.
so you're not tempted to reach for those sugary snacks when your willpower is low.
So it's like designing your surroundings
Yeah.
to make those good habits the path of least resistance.
That's a great way to put it. Clear talks about these decisive moments.
Decisive moments.
Those are the little choices we make
Okay.
that kind of set the course for the rest of our day.
Like what? What are some examples?
Well, think about choosing to walk or bike to work instead of driving,
Okay.
or packing a healthy lunch instead of hitting the drive-thru.
So it's those little decisions that can have a ripple effect.
Exactly. One small choice can kind of set off this cascade of healthy or unhealthy actions.
Okay. So what are some other decisive moments in your life? Where could you make like a small tweak to your routine to set yourself up for success?
It's a good question for everybody to think about.
And, we can't really talk about environment without talking about technology these days.
Right. It's like this double-edged sword.
Yeah. It can be our best friend and our worst enemy.
Definitely. On the one hand, we can use it to automate good habits, like, setting up automatic savings plans or bill pay.
Yeah.
So it's like we're outsourcing those mental tasks
Right.
to free up bandwidth for other stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
But on the other hand, technology can also be a major source of distraction.
Oh, absolutely. Endless scrolling, notifications. It's so easy to get sucked into that vortex.
Right. So we really need to be intentional about how we're using it.
Set boundaries. Protect our time and attention.
Yeah. And Clear suggests things like using website blockers, do not disturb modes on our phones, even designating certain times of day as tech-free zones.
It's about being mindful.
Absolutely.
Recognizing how technology is influencing our behavior
Right.
and then making conscious choices about how we want to interact with it.
Okay, so moving on to the 4th law, make it satisfying.
Right.
This one's all about making sure those good habits are rewarding
Okay.
so that you actually want to repeat them.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? We're wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
It's
So if a habit
supposed.
feels good, we're more likely to stick with it.
Clear calls this reinforcement.
Okay.
And it could be something as simple as, giving yourself a small treat after a workout
Okay.
or checking a task off your to-do list.
Even those little things
Yeah.
can make a difference.
It creates a sense of satisfaction like, yes, I did that.
But what about habits that aren't so enjoyable, like paying taxes or cleaning the bathroom? Those things we have to do.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, the not-so-fun stuff.
yeah. How do we make those more satisfying?
Well, Clear has this really interesting idea about making doing nothing enjoyable.
Doing nothing enjoyable. What does that even mean?
I know it sounds a little counterintuitive, but think about it this way. Let's say you're trying to watch less TV.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on depriving yourself, what if you focused on creating a more enjoyable alternative?
Okay.
Like maybe setting up a cozy reading nook with a comfy chair and good lighting, or creating a relaxing bath ritual.
So it's about shifting your focus from the thing you're trying to avoid to something that you actually enjoy doing.
Exactly. You're basically rewiring your brain to associate pleasure with those healthier choices.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me of a story that Clear tells about this therapist who used to smoke while riding horses.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
She quit smoking and stopped riding. And then decades later, she gets back on a horse and immediately she gets the urge to smoke.
It's amazing how those old associations can
Yeah.
linger, even after years.
Yeah, even if you think you've kicked a habit, sometimes those triggers can sneak up on you.
And it's not always enough to just avoid the bad habit. We need to replace it with something healthier and more satisfying.
Okay, so let's talk about something that I think is often overlooked. Emotions.
Okay.
They play a big role in habit formation,
Right,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Clear actually emphasizes this a lot. Our feelings are like this powerful fuel driving our actions. If a habit makes us feel good, we're more likely to repeat it. If it makes us feel bad, well, we're probably going to avoid it.
It's like we're not just logical robots, you know? Our emotions play a huge role in shaping our behavior.
Exactly. And Clear talks about this distinction between wanting and liking. Wanting is that initial desire that gets us to take action, while liking is the pleasure we experience as a result of that action.
Okay, so for a habit to stick, it needs to be both desirable and enjoyable.
Exactly. If it's not desirable, we won't have the motivation to start. And if it's not enjoyable, we won't have the motivation to continue.
So we need to find those habits that feel good to do,
Mm-hmm.
or at least find a way to make them feel good.
Right. And Clear actually suggests focusing on the positive aspects of a habit. Celebrating those small wins, and even creating this supportive environment where you feel encouraged.
So it's like you're building this positive feedback loop, right?
Yeah, where each success reinforces your motivation to keep going.
And then he also talks about reframing our thoughts,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, because if we're constantly telling ourselves that something's difficult or unpleasant,
Right.
we're more likely to believe it and just give up.
Hmm.
But if we can shift our perspective, focus on the benefits, we might find that it's not so bad after all.
So it's about kind of like changing the story you're telling yourself about the habit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about another big challenge that people face, and I'm sure you've encountered this too: boredom.
Oh, yeah.
It can really sabotage our efforts. Yeah, that initial excitement wears off, and the habit starts to feel monotonous. Like we're just going through the motions.
And then it's so easy to just, fall off the wagon.
Right. So how do we prevent boredom from, totally derailing us?
That's the question.
Clear has this really interesting insight. He says the sweet spot of desire actually occurs at a 50-50 split between success and failure.
So you need a little bit of both.
Yeah. We need enough winning to feel satisfied,
Right.
but enough wanting to keep us engaged.
So how do we create that in our lives?
Well, one strategy is to introduce variability into our routines.
Okay.
So instead of doing the same workout every day, maybe you mix it up
Okay.
with different activities. Or if you're trying to build a reading habit, explore different genres, different authors.
So it's about adding some variety, some novelty.
Yeah,
Keep those habits from feeling stale.
exactly. It's like adding a little spice to life.
Okay, let's talk about accountability. I think that's a big one for a lot of people. Having someone to answer to, can really make a difference in staying on track.
Oh, absolutely. It's like having a cheerleader in your corner.
Yeah.
And Clear talks about the power of a habit contract.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of this?
I have, yeah.
Okay, cool. So it's basically this verbal or written agreement where you state your commitment to a habit
Okay.
and the consequences if you don't follow through.
So you're kind of like making a deal with yourself.
Exactly. And by involving other people, you're adding a layer of social obligation.
I remember Clear shares a story about an entrepreneur named Brian Harris who used this to lose weight.
Oh, yeah. He involved his wife and his personal trainer.
Yeah. And it worked.
It's a great example of how we don't have to go it alone.
Okay, so we've talked about environment, we've talked about accountability. Let's circle back to genetics and personality. It can be easy to feel like, well, I'm just not a morning person or I'm naturally disorganized, but how much is really predetermined by our genes and how much can we actually control?
That's a great question. And Clear actually acknowledges that our genes do play a role, but he emphasizes that we're not prisoners of our DNA.
So we have the power to choose our environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can cultivate habits that align with our desired outcomes. It's not about denying the influence of genetics.
Right.
It's about understanding it
Okay.
and then working with it.
Okay. He uses this analogy of a deck of cards.
I love that one.
We're all dealt a certain hand,
Yeah.
but we get to decide how to play those cards.
Exactly. And that reminds me of another great piece of advice from Clear. Work hard on the things that come easy.
Okay. What does he mean by that?
He's basically saying that you should focus on the activities that feel effortless and enjoyable to you, and then really double down on those.
So find your zone of genius.
Exactly.
And then exploit it.
Yeah. When you're working in your zone of genius, you're more likely to experience flow. That feeling of being in the zone.
Yeah.
Time flies by. You're totally absorbed in the task. We've all had those moments where we're just firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, it's like everything just clicks into place.
Yeah.
And we're able to do amazing things.
It feels almost effortless.
So how do we find those activities, those things that light us up,
Yeah.
that let us tap into that flow state?
Clear is a big proponent of exploration, especially early in life.
Okay.
He says, try a bunch of stuff. Pay attention to what feels natural and energizing.
Uh-huh.
What are you actually good at? What sparks your passion?
Okay.
And don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone
Right.
and try something new.
It reminds me of that story that he tells about Eliud Kipchoge, the Kenyan runner,
Right.
who didn't actually discover his love of running until he was a teenager.
Amazing. Right. And now he's one of the greatest marathon runners ever.
It just goes to show that sometimes it takes a little bit of experimentation to find our true calling.
And even once we've found those strengths,
Mm-hmm.
remember that mastery is an ongoing journey. There's always room for improvement. So how do we continue to hone those skills?
That's a good question.
Clear talks about the importance of deliberate practice, which is basically pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone
Okay.
and seeking out feedback.
So it's not just about doing the same thing over and over again.
Right. It's about being intentional, focused, and open to learning.
Okay. He also talks about the Polgar sisters.
Oh, yeah, the chess prodigy.
Yeah, their father basically raised them to be chess champions. And through years of deliberate practice
Mhm.
and a carefully designed environment,
Yeah.
they actually became world-class chess players.
It's amazing.
So even those skills that we think of as being innate
Yeah.
can actually be developed
hmm
with the right kind of training.
It's really inspiring, actually.
Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. Motivation.
Okay.
We all struggle with it,
Oh,
right?
yeah, big time. It's like this elusive beast.
You start out with all this energy and excitement,
Mm.
but how do we sustain that over the long haul?
Cleary has some good advice here. He says, focus on the process, not just the outcome.
Okay, so explain that a little bit more.
So often, we get so fixated on the end result that it feels overwhelming and discouraging, especially if we're not seeing those immediate results.
Yeah. It's like we're so focused on reaching the destination that we forget to enjoy the journey.
Exactly. But when you shift your attention to those daily actions, those little rituals, the journey itself becomes more manageable and even enjoyable.
Okay. So what are some ways that we can do that? How can we focus on the process?
Well, one thing is to break down those big goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay.
So it's less daunting.
Yeah, it's like instead of trying to climb Mount Everest,
Gotcha.
you're just focusing on taking one step at a time.
Exactly. And each step, no matter how small,
Hmm.
is still moving you closer to your goal.
And it feels less overwhelming.
Yeah, much less overwhelming.
Okay, so we've talked about breaking things down. What are some other strategies?
Remember habit stacking?
Oh, yeah, that was a good
I
one.
talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
It's linking a new habit
Mm-hmm.
to an existing one.
So give me an example of that.
Okay, so after I brush my teeth, I'll meditate for 5 minutes. Or after I pour my morning coffee,
Mm-hmm.
I'll write in my journal for 10 minutes.
So it's just like building it into your existing routine.
Yeah.
So you don't have to think about it as much.
It becomes almost automatic.
Okay. Clear also talks about visual cues, right? As
Yeah.
a way to kind of remind us of our habits and keep them top of mind.
Oh yeah, visual cues are super helpful. It can be something as simple as, a sticky note on your mirror with an affirmation,
Okay.
or keeping your workout clothes visible,
Right.
or placing a book you want to read on your bedside table.
Okay. So it's those little reminders.
Yeah, gentle nudges.
Okay. And what about our environment, like our social environment? Does that play a role in our habits?
Big time.
Yeah.
Claire has that famous quote, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with."
Wow, that's a powerful statement. It really makes you think about the company you keep.
Yeah. It's a reminder that we're deeply influenced by the people around us.
So we want to surround ourselves with people who support our goals
Absolutely.
Yeah.
People who inspire us, challenge us to grow.
and hold us accountable, right?
Definitely. And don't forget about your physical environment, too.
Oh, right.
Create spaces that actually support those desired behaviors.
Okay, yeah. So, like, if you want to eat healthier, maybe declutter your kitchen,
Yeah.
stock it with fruits and vegetables.
Make healthy choices more accessible.
Yeah.
Okay. As we're wrapping up,
Mm-hmm.
there's one final point that Clear emphasizes that I think is really important.
Okay.
Self-compassion.
Self-compassion. That's a good one.
It's so easy to get caught up in that whole self-improvement thing
Yeah.
and to beat ourselves up when we mess up,
Yeah, we can be our own worst critics.
for sure.
Mm.
We focus on our shortcomings,
Mm.
the habits we haven't mastered, the goals we haven't reached. But Clear reminds us that we're all human.
Yeah, we're all a work in progress.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being kind to ourselves.
Yeah, I like that.
Embrace those imperfections.
Yeah.
View those setbacks as opportunities for growth.
Okay, so how do we actually practice self-compassion? What does that look like?
Well, for one thing, celebrate your wins. no matter how small.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Acknowledge those little victories. Give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah, we don't do that enough, I think.
I know. It's easy to focus on what we haven't accomplished, but those little wins, they add up.
They do. And it just feels good, right?
It
To
does.
acknowledge your progress, even those baby steps.
So remember, habit formation, it's not about striving for perfection.
Right.
It's about embracing the journey, learning, adapting, and celebrating those small steps that lead to those big transformations.
I like that. Okay, so that's the end of part 2.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. And I'm excited to continue this conversation in part 3.
Me too.
So, until then, keep those atomic habits rolling.
See you next time.
Welcome back to our deep dive.
Mhm.
You know, it's amazing how much we've learned about habits
It really is.
and how they shape our lives.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about
Yeah.
is how everybody seems to approach habits differently.
It's true. Some people just seem to naturally adopt new routines.
Yeah.
While others really struggle to stay consistent.
It makes me wonder how much of that is because of our personalities.
That's a great point, and something that Clear actually talks about in the book. He has a whole chapter on how personality influences habit formation.
Okay.
And it turns out that, yeah, our genes can kind of predispose us to certain behaviors.
Okay, so some people are naturally more introverted or extroverted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some people are more inclined to be risk averse,
Mm.
while others are, total thrill seekers.
So how do those tendencies play into how we form habits?
Well, it can affect things like how we respond to rewards, how we deal with stress, even how much structure we need in our lives.
So does that mean we're just stuck with whatever habits our genes predispose us to?
Not necessarily.
Mhm.
Remember, genes aren't destiny. While they provide a blueprint, we still have a lot of control over how we build our habits.
Okay, so we're not just puppets of our DNA.
Right. Clear uses this great analogy of a deck of cards. We're all dealt a certain hand, but we get to decide how we play those cards.
I like that.
So we might have certain predispositions, but we can still learn strategies to work with them.
So it's yeah, we might not be able to change the cards we're dealt,
Yeah,
but we can learn how to play the game strategically.
exactly.
This reminds me of something else that Clear talks about, working hard on the things that come easy.
Oh, I love that advice. It's so counterintuitive.
Yeah. So what does he mean by that?
He's saying, focus on those activities
Oh.
that you naturally enjoy and excel at.
Okay.
Things that feel effortless for you.
So find your strengths
Mm-hmm.
and then double down on them.
Exactly. Because when you're working in that zone of genius, as some people call it,
Okay.
you're more likely to experience flow, make progress, and actually stay motivated. It's like you're tapping into your superpowers.
It's like those times when you're just in the groove
Yeah.
and work doesn't even feel like work.
Exactly. It feels effortless and enjoyable. You get so absorbed in what you're doing that you lose track of time.
So how do we even find those activities, those things that really light us up?
Well, Clear is a big believer in exploration,
Okay.
trying new things, especially early in life.
So just experiment, see what sticks.
Yeah, be curious, step outside your comfort zone. You never know what you might discover about yourself. And don't be afraid to try things that might seem a little unconventional.
Okay.
You never know where you might find those hidden talents or passions.
I think it's really encouraging, right, to know that we don't always have to have it all figured out.
Exactly. It's a process of discovery.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the story about Eliud Kipchoge.
The marathon runner.
Yeah, he didn't even discover his love for running until he was a teenager.
And look at him now, one of the greatest of all time.
It just goes to show, sometimes it takes a bit of trial and error to find that thing that really clicks.
And remember, even once we've identified those strengths, mastery is an ongoing process.
Right.
There's always room for improvement, for growth. We never truly arrive.
So how do we keep learning and refining our skills?
Clear talks about the importance of what he calls deliberate practice.
Yeah.
It's about pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone,
Okay.
seeking out feedback so you can continually improve.
So it's not just about mindlessly repeating the same actions over and over.
Right. It's about being intentional, focused, and open to learning.
Okay. This reminds me of the Polgar sisters.
The chess player.
Yeah, their father. He decided to raise them to be chess champions. And through years of this really intense practice and this carefully crafted environment that he created for them,
Yeah.
they actually became some of the best chess players in
Wow.
the world.
It's an amazing story.
It really shows that even skills that we think of as being in it can be developed with the right kind of training and support.
Totally.
Okay, so let's talk about something that I know a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah.
Motivation, right?
It's so hard to maintain.
I mean, we all start with these great intentions, all this energy, but then life happens, right?
It does.
And it's easy to lose steam. So how do we stay motivated over the long haul?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Clear has this really interesting piece of advice. He says, focus on the process, not just the outcome.
Okay, explain that a little bit more.
So often, we get so fixated on the end result
Right.
that it feels overwhelming, especially if we're not seeing those immediate results.
Yeah, we want that instant gratification.
But when we can shift our attention to the daily actions, the small things we're doing every day,
Yeah.
it becomes less about that distant goal and more about the journey itself.
So it's like we're enjoying the ride?
Exactly. It's about finding satisfaction in those small steps, knowing that each one is moving you closer to where you want to be.
So how can we do that? How can we focus more on the process?
Well, one thing is to break down those big, audacious goals into smaller, bite-sized chunks.
Uh-huh.
Something that feels manageable, not so overwhelming. It's kind of like that saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
I like that. So it's less about trying to achieve this massive transformation overnight
Yeah,
and more about making those consistent incremental changes over time.
exactly.
And it feels less daunting, right?
Yeah, because each step feels achievable,
Yeah.
and each small win gives you that little boost of motivation to keep going.
Okay, what are some other things we can do?
Well, think back to habit stacking.
Oh, right.
It's such a simple but effective strategy.
Yeah.
It's all about attaching a new habit to an existing one so it becomes part of your routine.
So give me an example.
Okay, so after you make your morning coffee, you meditate for 5 minutes. Or after you get home from work, you go for a quick walk around the block.
So you're basically using your existing habits as triggers for the new ones you're trying to build.
Exactly. You're making those good habits so automatic that they become almost second nature.
I like that.
And don't underestimate the power of visual cues.
Yeah, we talked about those earlier.
Simple things like a sticky note on your bathroom mirror
Mm-hmm.
with your daily affirmation,
Okay.
or keeping your workout clothes out where you can see them.
So those little reminders can make a big difference.
They really can. They keep your goals top of mind and make it easier to take action.
And you know, something else that I think is important is our environment, specifically the people we surround ourselves with.
Oh, absolutely. That's something that Clear emphasizes a lot.
He says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that we're deeply influenced by the people we choose to be around. So it's worth thinking about who those people are in your life.
Yeah, are they supporting your goals, inspiring you to grow?
Exactly. We want to surround ourselves with people who lift us up, not drag us down.
And it's not just about the people, right? Our physical environment matters too.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Clear talks about designing spaces that actually support our desired behaviors. So if you want to eat healthier, maybe you declutter your kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you've got plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables on hand.
Okay.
If you want to be more creative, you might dedicate a space in your home to art supplies or musical instruments.
It's about creating an environment that makes it easy to do the things you want to do.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into atomic habits,
Yeah.
there's one last thing I want to highlight that I think is super important.
What's that?
Self-compassion.
Okay. Yes.
It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of self-improvement and be really hard on ourselves, when we stumble.
Yeah, we all have those days.
But Clear reminds us that, hey, we're all human. We're going to make mistakes. It's part of the process.
It's okay to not be perfect.
Exactly. So instead of beating ourselves up, what if we try to approach those slip-ups with kindness and understanding?
Okay, so it's like instead of saying, ugh, I messed up again,
Yeah,
maybe we say, okay, that didn't go as planned, but I'm going to learn from it and try again tomorrow.
exactly. It's about being your own cheerleader, not your own worst critic. And it's about celebrating those wins, no matter how small they might seem.
Yeah, I love that. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
I know, it's been a really fascinating exploration of habits. We've learned about the science behind them, the role of environment and identity,
Yeah.
and most importantly, the power of those tiny gains.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that building good habits, it's not about these big sweeping changes. It's about those small, consistent actions that compound over time.
And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs along the way.
So be patient with yourself.
Yeah, give yourself grace. And most importantly, don't give up.
I think that's a great place to end it.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep those atomic habits rolling.
Bye.